let's look first at organization for reproduction. In the highly advanced social insects, the honeybees, termites, on the right you have stingless bees, which are close cousins of the honeybee, and also some wasp societies. You have the transference of reproduction from all the other individuals that might be part of the group or the society that are interacting over to the queen. The queen takes on the primary reproductive role for all the others. So you end up with castes that represent their roles. So in this case, here's the queen. She is the primary egg layer, the primary source of eggs that produce other queens, replacement queens or daughter queens, and workers and drones. And then you have the workers here who are, in the case of the honeybee, not sterile, but they're facultatively sterile. In other words, they can become reproductives, but most of the time they're not. When they do become reproductives, they can only produce males, the haploid individuals in the nest. So they can, in some circumstances, become reproductives, but normally they don't. And the termites, you have the same. You have the queen, and then you have the workers, which are not reproducing. And in the stingless bees, here's the queen, and here are the workers who, again, are facultatively sterile. They can lay eggs that develop into males under the right kinds of circumstances. You see other levels of organization. So you have the organization being, you have individuals who are primary reproductives and those that are not. But then you have that organized into a broader structure that includes the seasonal synchronization of the production of the reproductive castes. So we have the queen, she's a reproductive, and we have the males, the drones, and they are reproductives. The workers are normally not reproductives. This represents a swarm, which is one level of organization of reproduction, in that the swarm is the female component of reproduction. When a colony swarms, the colony maybe was housed inside of a tree. About half of the members of that colony, which could be 10, 20,000 individual bees, fly out along with the old queen. And they settle with the old queen on some structure nearby. In this case, it's a tree. And then they seek out a new nesting site where they will then establish a new colony. So the colony has undergone fission. One became two. And it had this process by producing a new queen that stays behind in the nest. And that's the female component of reproduction. This fissioning, establishing a new nest, and the new queen inheriting the old nest. And this is a process that's synchronized in the season. So typically what a colony of bees does is it starts out at some point in the spring with a reduced number of bees in the colony. They've been dying over the winter. The colony hasn't been producing very many new workers during the winter. So it starts out at a relatively low population and it starts growing. This represents the increase in the production of worker brood. The queen lays eggs, they're raising workers. As they raise more workers, the colony gets bigger and bigger, it expands. At some point then, it produces new queens and it swarms. The old queen flies away and the new queen that inherits the nest has to fly out and mate. So that's a synchronous thing that takes place in the spring. This line here represents the production of males, the drone brood in the colony. So you can see that the worker production increases over the season and then starts to diminish later in the season in the late summer, whereas the drones are produced in a spurt at the beginning of the season and then declines for the rest of the season, very few males being produced. And that's because this point right here, this other curve that you're seeing with all the dots on it, that is the seasonal production of swarms. And that is in Davis, California. This was just one study. So in this particular study, these colonies were swarming at this time of the year, and the drones are being produced, peaking over here, and the swarms peaking here. So the production of those drones was synchronized so that the drones would be mature and the maximum number of them would be flying through the air at the time when they had the maximum number of new virgin queens out there mating as a consequence of being produced in colonies where the mother queen had left with the swarm. Colonies also protect the reproductive rights of the queen. As I said, workers can lay eggs. They can lay eggs that develop into males. And if you look at the last slide I showed, a lot of males get produced. In this particular time period over the whole season, there can be thousands of drones produced, males that are needed for mating with queens as part of the male reproductive component of the life history of the honeybee. So the workers can lay some of those eggs. And in the presence of a queen, that is policed. The other workers, they protect the reproductive rights of the queen by identifying and often being very aggressive towards other laying workers, and then somehow or another, I've never seen them kill one, but they disappear. So they're constantly policing their own in order to protect the reproductive rights of the queen. Honeybee colonies are organized for nutrition. Some individuals specialize in collecting nectar, the nectar foragers. Others specialize in collecting pollen, the pollen foragers, as you can see in the video here in the middle. They're collecting out of a pan that we provided for them to watch the way in which they collect their pollen and load it on their legs. But the pollen that's collected from the flowers is brought back to the nest, and it's stored in combs that can contain a lot of pollen, some of the combs. And again, the pollen is stored close to the brood because the nurse bees, which are a specific caste or task group of bees in the nest, they will consume the pollen, which is a protein resource, convert those pollen proteins into glandular secretion proteins, and then feed it to the larvae in the nest. So here's an organizational structure that's involved with nutrition and reproduction. The nectar foragers, they bring the nectar back from the plants, and then they pass it off to other bees that are specialists who will then process that and turn it from nectar into honey and store it in combs. And the stored honey then becomes reserve resources for them in times of need. Protection. Bees select defensible spaces to build their nests. Often, or usually, it's inside of some sort of an enclosed structure where they get some protection from the wind, they get protection from their predators. Hollowed out trees are a place where you find lots of bees inhabiting. They can inhabit your water meter box out in the front of your house is a good place for the Africanized bees to inhabit. They'll get inside of that. Anything that's enclosed, anything that gives them some way of defending it and gives protection from the elements. In this case, you can see they've selected a hollow tree. This is the entrance into that hollow tree. Typically, entrances are south-facing. They're positioned near the bottom of the cavity. This provides a flow of air for them so that they can better thermal regulate the nest and regulate the amount of humidity that builds up inside of it. And typically somewhere between 2.5 and 75 centimeters in diameter for the size of the hole. And this again provides them a space that they can defend against any potential intruders. Bees guard the entrance. As you see these bees here, some of these bees at the entrance, you can see that they're sitting there and they're engaging bees that are returning from foraging trips or whatever, and they're checking their credentials. They're making sure that they actually are nestmates and belong in the nest. So they are protecting their resources inside that nest, the brood, the pollen, and the honey, and so they're setting up a gauntlet of guard bees for the returning bees or potential robbers would have to go through, and if they get detected, then they will be rejected. They also defend the nest vigorously against other kinds of invaders like beekeepers or bears. They have a very evolved system for defense of the nest. The queen and the worker differ very much with respect to the structure of their sting. The queen sting is designed, it's smooth, it's curved. The only time she really uses her sting is when she engages in fights with other queens. Virgin queens fight each other for inheriting the nest after the mother queen has flown away with the swarm. They will fight each other to the death. She has a stinger that can be reused. Workers have evolved a barbed stinger. The barbed stinger gets embedded into the victim, and once it's embedded, it sticks. It's like a fish hook. It doesn't come out. And the worker bee then pulls herself away, and when she pulls away, she actually pulls away her intestines are attached to this mass, including the stinger, and she pulls it away. She actually dies in the act of stinging. But this is an adaptation so that the stinger remains behind. It's embedded, it pumps in the venom, and it does the maximum amount of damage to the intruder possible. And this is a case of a beekeeper who actually worked for me at one point in time who did not like to wear gloves. And you can see the results of not wearing gloves when you're working with bees that are very, very defensive, such as Africanized honeybees. They also protect health, the health of the colony. They engage in undertaking behavior, grooming. They will raise the temperature of the brood nest and generate a fever in the case of certain types of diseases that are where the pathogen is sensitive to temperature. They have hygienic behavior, and they will embalm things that they can't remove. So here's a case of undertaker bee removing a dead bee that was in the nest. These dead bees could be sources of spreading pathogens, so they remove them. They haul them out the entrance, they fly through the air, and they'll drop them 100 meters or more away from the nest to get the pathogen at a greater distance. Hygienic behavior includes what's called uncapping and removal behavior. They will detect underneath the cappings of the brood, the larvae, when they reach a certain age, the cells get capped with a capping. They become a pupa underneath that, but they can detect an unhealthy pupa or prepupa underneath the cappings of those cells. They will uncap it, and then they will remove the pupa or the larva from that cell. Again, removing the pathogen along with the contaminated individual.